If you select poor tenants that don't pay rent, you know how much your building is worth? The value of your building can be hugely impacted by poor tenant selection.
Welcome to the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Axel Ragnarsson, and on this show, I dissect how seasoned multifamily investors started, built, and scaled their businesses. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. Joining me in this episode is a good friend of mine and a business partner of mine, Mr. Ryan Weiss, who is the principal broker and the director of property management and my founding partner in our management company called Blue Door Living, which manages small to mid-size multifamily properties throughout New Hampshire. And he's somebody with a long background in the property management field. And I wanted to bring him on the podcast to discuss his journey, both personally as a real estate investor, but really his journey as a business owner, and how we've grown Blue Door Living from 40 units when we started it to over 700 units under management today, really in the last 3.5 years. And Ryan deserves, 95, 99% of the credit for being in the office on a day-to-day basis, growing that business with some behind-the-scenes support from myself and our other business partner. But this is a great episode for everyone who's just growing a business, fundamentally speaking, and then especially if you're interested in growing a management company and running a management company, this is going to be a great episode as well. We also talk about some tactical property management related topics, such as what you need to be focusing on in regards to successfully managing multifamily real estate. We also talk about delegation, working with global talent, and a lot of the topics that we discuss and that Ryan really shares or dives into, I should say, is relevant to anybody growing any business. And it just so happens that we're talking about property management in this episode. But long story short, this is a really, really good episode with someone who I've known for a very long time. And we just have a great conversation as relates to what it takes to actually grow a business, what it takes to grow a management portfolio and a management company, and what it really takes to actually successfully manage multifamily real estate. So be sure to give this episode a listen and also reach out to Ryan if you're a New Hampshire investor, regardless of whether or not you're looking for third-party management. He's a wealth of information. He's a great resource. And I'm sure he would love to connect with you if you are somebody who's active in the multifamily or just the real estate space within New Hampshire. So thanks again, as always, for listening, and enjoy this episode with Ryan Weiss. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. Joining me is a good friend of mine, business partner, someone I've known for a long period of time, and somebody who knows property management extremely well, given he's been living and breathing it for a number of years now. But joining me on the show today is Mr. Ryan Weiss. How are we doing, Ryan?
Doing great, Axel. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I gave a little bit of a high-level intro to you in the audio recording that kind of preceded our conversation here, but as a recap, or as just a more thorough overview, I guess I should say, why don't you give some folks a sense of your story here, where you came from, how you got into real estate, and, we'll talk about how obviously we're working together in the property management company, but, what were you doing maybe pre-real estate? How'd you find the real estate business? And I guess what is Blue Door Living in terms of a business now? We'll talk about the business itself.
Sure. Yeah, happy to give you some background on sort of who I am and where I came from, and I'll give you the the 3-minute instead of the 30-minute version. So I grew up in New Hampshire, specifically Manchester, and my initial interest in house hacking actually came from my dad. When I was growing up, my dad owner-occupied a triplex over on Kelly Street, and I remember as a kid, he would tell me, "We're living here for free because the tenants that we have in this building are paying for our mortgage." And that equated to like getting to go to Chuck E. Cheese more and like getting to take family vacations and stuff like that. So that was a really cool, tangible benefit that I saw early on from real estate investing and specifically house hacking. And I remember asking my dad, I was like, "Dad, what if you just did this like 5 or 6 more times?" And he said, "I'd love to. Let me know if you can find some properties for me to buy." But so I was sort of inspired from a young age to be sort of inclined towards real estate. And then as a teenager, read Rich Dad Poor Dad, read some other personal development books, learned that being self-employed, starting a business is probably the direction you want to take. So that was like the initial interest that I had. And then my professional career took an interesting track. So I became an adult. I got a job at Bank of America as a personal and small business banker when I was 19. I did that job for about 2 years. While I was working there, I was making a reasonable salary. I was also still interested in investing in real estate, and I was trying to find deals that I could buy, but I felt like there was a knowledge gap that I had. I didn't know, what things rent for. I didn't know what a good part of town was or a bad part of town was. I didn't even know, what buildings should be priced at. And should they have parking? Should they have laundry, utilities included? It was an overflow of information. So I made a few offers while I was working at Bank of America, but I thought, man, if I'm going to invest in real estate, I really want to be immersed in it. So I decided to pivot my career, stopped working at Bank of America after 2 years, and then got a job at a local property management business. And that's where you and I met. So you met me as the leasing agent at this property management business that I was working at. And my goal with becoming the leasing agent at that company was to get that knowledge that would allow me to invest in real estate. So I wanted to learn, what do things rent for? What affects the rent? What do real estate investors look for when they're buying property? And that job that I had as the leasing agent checked all those boxes, and I was able to do my first house hack while I was employed at that company. I bought a triplex that I moved into in Manchester, and it's turned out to be a great deal. Really glad I bought that property. And so you and I worked together for maybe about a year and a half through that business, right? So I would rent your units, tell you what things are renting for, give you updates on rental applications, things like that. So we sort of started developing a relationship that way. And then it's interesting. I think, the timing was sort of right for both of us, where you had purchased enough units at this point that you were interested in bringing management in-house. And I felt like I had sort of tapped out all the knowledge that I could collect at that company about real estate investing, and was looking to do something, a little bit more substantial. And, I think was it at NH that you were like, hey, you want to start a management company?
Yeah, yeah. I think, for the folks listening, I think it was like a local real estate meetup where it was like, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking about. Let me just plant this seed and see if it turns into anything. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
and now I'm jumping ahead, but yeah,
No, no.
one thing
So
leads to another and we got a business on our hands. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think I was given a talk about property management, and maybe that reminded you that that was an interest that you had, and you were like, "Hey, let's get coffee." And yeah, the rest is history. So we started Blue Door Living back in 2020 with 40 units under management, which were yours, and that was sort of the seed that got the business started. And that was a great way to do it, because if we started with 0 units, I think it would have been much more difficult. So that was really helpful when we started the business. But yeah, so we started with 40 units under management, and now we're sitting at about 540 units under management, and about 170 association units. So the business has scaled 10x in 3-4 years, and it's looking like our growth trajectory is going to continue. So,
Hmm.
and in that time personally, so I did a house hack. I bought a fourplex with my friend. I did another house hack, and then we did a deal together in Allenstown. That was the first deal that involved raising money for me. So, yeah, um,
It's been a hell of a ride, that's for sure.
sure has been.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to highlight too, just kind of the early components of your story there, and I want to ask you to maybe throw a couple dates on this, right, so people have a context of like timeline. But um, a lot of people want to get into real estate, but they don't realize that you can just get into it as a career and like learn the fundamentals of it before trying to go and do deals yourself. And
Mm,
it's funny, if I were to go do it again, I probably would have gotten a job at and I had the opportunity to back in college to get a job at the property management company that managed, the building I lived in as a student. And I knew a lot of people that did that, and they took away a lot of just like the fundamentals of property management, the fundamentals of whether it's leasing, maintenance coordination, and then like the core tenants, you're kind of indoctrinated in a business where it's like you got to minimize vacancy. You want people to renew their leases. Like you kind of learn all of that stuff. Whereas a lot of people just learn that on their own deals, which there's a cost of learning that when it's your own money within a deal itself. Um, so, I think that strategy, just for folks listening, is extremely powerful, especially for young people that are getting into a career in general, they're earlier in their career. But let's assign some timelines because you're a young guy. Like I want everyone to understand that you're a young dude. Like you were what, 21 when you started at the other, management company that we obviously met at, or 22, or you were in your
yeah.
early 20s, I know, and now you're not much older than that. But um, But I
Yeah.
think it's interesting how quickly things have progressed for you personally, which is interesting too.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, so and I'll tell you my timeline in a second, but just to go back to it, I think you're right. Um, a lot of people don't realize that you can learn about the industry by working in the industry. I don't think, I think a lot of people who get interested in real estate in investing have their W-2, and then they, want to start, a source of side income, right? But if you are willing to consider working in the industry, you can turbocharge your learning curve and start investing at a much faster rate than you realize. And that's the strategy that I took, and it's paid off really well. Property management too, I think, is a unique industry because what you really are is a hired landlord. So I got a tremendous amount of practice being a landlord through operating in a property management business. Um, that also just made me way more effective at managing my own rentals. I definitely would recommend property management for anyone who's willing to consider a career change. I mean, you will learn everything about investing. But yeah, as far as my timeline goes, so it was, let's see, I believe it was 2016. Started working at the bank. Graduated high school in 2015, so I was 18. 19 working at the bank, which it was interesting. I was the youngest employee at the bank, and I don't know how can we swear on this podcast?
Yeah, yeah, fuck
Yeah, I
shit,
don't.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know how I bullshitted my way into that position. It said in big bold letters like bachelor's degree required. Prior to that, I had worked doing sales for about 8 months. I did commission only roof and gutter sales, which I skipped over because it was kind of a bullshit job.
Yeah.
but but I was able to bring that sales experience to the bank, and they found that interesting. So it was 2016 work there. I think so. I was 19, and then 2018 started working at the property management company in Manchester, at that point I was 21, and then I worked there from 21 to 23, and so I was 20, 23 and 2020. Sorry, I don't want to mess people up. I was 23 in 2020 when we started Blue Door. I think specifically I
Yep.
was 22, and so now 4 years later I'm 26. So yeah, I bought my first triplex when I was 21. Felt you know, totally like massive imposter syndrome. I had $10,000 as a down payment, and that was the only $10,000 I had. That was like, brought my bank account to zero to get that property. So yeah, it's been great, being your business partner and being in this industry, because it's been able to really turbocharge like my ability to build wealth, and building a business has been a great decision. And I feel really grateful because I look at like, the business statistics, and it's like 40% of businesses fail in the first year, and then it's 80% within the first 5. So I feel really grateful that we're approaching year 5 and, still kicking.
Yeah, right. Yeah, knock on wood.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, and we're gonna get into property management for all the people listening here shortly. But the timeline, like when I think about house hacking as a strategy, which we all understand is an extremely powerful strategy, whether it's to start building a real estate portfolio, whether it's just as a personal finance strategy, you're not looking to be a real estate investor and you just want to do one, you just want to minimize your cost of living, like a great strategy to do that. Um, but there is an age where you're less open to it, right? You hit your late 20s, your
I'm
early
approaching it.
30s. Yeah, where it's kind of like you maybe want to buy a single family home, but unfortunately, a lot of people go to college for 4 years, accumulate a ton of debt, and they're not in a position to go and even sign a mortgage until their mid to late 20s, even if they're really figuring it out on the income side. And I think your story is interesting because you got it done very early. You got into the workforce very early, and it's like that is such a powerful way to kind of kickstart your financial futures, being like 21, 2, 3, whatever it is, buying a personal residence, and in this form of multifamily where you're living in a unit and renting out the others. And then you can get a couple of those under your belt by the time you phase out of that life wise. So I mean,
Mm.
it's interesting for people listening to consider that as the trade off here. It's like, going to college is an entirely different 5 hour long podcast. We're not going to do that here, but
I
it
got a
is an
lot to say
interesting
about that.
concept. Yeah, as
I,
I'm sure we
are you
both do.
are you
But
familiar with my college situation?
no, well, vaguely, I know we've talked about it, but if you want to share it, go for it.
Yeah, so I'll just share it briefly. So I did well in high school. I had I don't know, whatever, 4.0 GPA or something like that. And I received a full scholarship to SNU. and I was accepted actually into their honors business program. So I was going to get a bachelor's degree in 3 years, and I was going to have my MBA in 4 years for free. So I was going to be 22 years old with an MBA. I didn't want to go. I had read so many business books from the ages of like 14 to 18. I told my parents, I was like, listen, if I can figure out how to make a business, a few $100,000, $1 million a year, $10 million a year, how would I not be compensated for that? And I don't need a degree to figure out how to provide value in the marketplace. I can just go and ask people what their business needs.
Yeah.
And I can figure out how to develop those skills. And, they said, well, you should really go. It's free. And, I let them talk me into it. So I went for a semester. It was just as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I decided to leave. So, and I'm glad that I did. I mean, I can't imagine if I, wasted those 3 years where I was learning how to do real estate. I was, building my reputation in the market. I bought my first deal at 21 before I would have graduated from college. And yeah, personally, I'm very grateful that I did not, end up in the situation that a lot of young people are with like student loans and
Mhm.
missing out prime years of their life.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I'm kind of in the camp of like the only real argument in going to college is either A, if you're going to be incredibly intentional about the network that you're developing while you're in college and you're going to meet people that are actually going to, help you in your career or with business or what have you, or
Mhm.
it's the social aspect. It's like going and you meet friends and you learn how to live in like, it's like all the stuff that's not associated to the educational degree that you're actually paying for. But you're, I
Yeah,
mean,
and then you got like, doctors, engineers, lawyers, whatever. Like, that makes sense.
exactly.
Yeah.
If you're in a specialized field from a knowledge standpoint, but if you're going for just business, it's like if you start a
Yeah.
business, you'll learn more in 6 months than you would in 4 years at a like
Yeah.
less than that, 3 months
Ru-
probably.
Running Blue Door has been an MBA for me.
Yeah, exactly. All
And
right, so
I think it's more impressive too, right? Like MBA versus running a successful business, hiring 15 people, developing a brand in the market. Like I feel like if I'm applying somewhere and they're comparing my resume versus Joe who has an MBA but doesn't have any actual business experience, it's it. I think that the actual
it's not
experience makes.
comparable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And even going and getting an MBA, that's a whole other thing. I don't know if there's a bigger waste of money for those who are going out there and dropping six figures on MBAs nowadays.
Hmm.
But anyways, so let's actually talk about growing. First of all, defining the management company. Blue Door Living is a management company that Ryan and I own with a third partner. It's based in Manchester, New Hampshire. We manage, real estate, primarily kind of small to mid-sized multifamily real estate throughout central southern New Hampshire, right? For all those listening. Um, I want to talk about some of the challenges you faced as we've grown the business and primarily as you've grown the business, right? As really the individuals in the office every day driving the ship. I want to break it down from kind of inception to the first stage of growth. And then from that stage, and then we'll break it down. I kind of mentioned this to you before we hit record, but from 40, 50 units, which is what we started with, my units, couple small third party clients, we'll just round it off, say 50 units to the first couple hundred, 250 units. I think that there is a set of challenges associated with getting the business from that 50 mark to the 250 mark. And just for you to freeball it, like when you think back from like, day one to kind of year or month 18, year two, when we kind of got to that point, what were some of the challenges you faced organizationally speaking and actually growing the business? And what were some of the challenges as it relates to getting us to that 250 mark?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I guess the first thing that comes to mind when we were first getting the business started is what now? Like what should I be doing with my time? What should I be working on? When you start a business, it feels like there is like an infinite amount of activities that you could be doing. And for me, the transitioning from being a W-2 employee to being self-employed was realizing that no one was going to tell me which activity on that list I should be doing. I had to figure it out for myself. And that was maybe sort of a reality shock that, I wake up in the morning and I have to decide what to do with the day. And that was challenging because I wasn't sure which direction to head in. Should I work on marketing and driving new clients? Should I try to improve our product first and make sure that we have sort of the best management product in the Manchester market? Should I make our website super fancy with videos and clickable links? Should I do social media marketing? Should I hire someone? Should I find an office? Because when we first started, I was just running it out of the spare bedroom in my apartment. So those were all challenging things to figure out. And I guess the route that I decided to take was, number one, making sure that our management product was really good. So, leasing apartments on time, leveraging software to make it so that we don't have to hire a ton of employees so we can stay lean while we're growing. Um, Going to real estate networking meetups and meeting investors and talking to them about their management needs. What are you currently dissatisfied with your current management company? What are you looking for in a management company? And do you want me to manage your real estate? And coming from another management company in Manchester, I was able to see a lot of stuff in that company, like what worked, what didn't, what were people praising and what were people complaining about. So focusing on improving the quality of our product was what I really focused on during that first sort of 18 to 24 months. And I think that paid off because we had really good client retention. Um, and so that meant that we didn't necessarily have to have a huge sales funnel, right? The clients that we got, we stayed with. We still have many of the first clients that we initially got. And so the clients that we got were sticky. And then I think property management, at least in the Manchester market, and I think probably in most markets, is very reputation based, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you have a reputation for providing a poor product, ripping people off, being a slumlord, whatever, it's going to be very difficult for you to gain and keep new clients. You'll have a huge amount of churn, and all the big players, right? They do business through reputations. So I heard about you from so and so. They said you did a great job. I want you to manage my buildings. I've had that conversation, multiple times. So, maintaining a good reputation, building a great product is what I focused on, and what really, moved the needle.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's applicable to any business, right? I mean, it's the greatest sales process or marketing strategy is a great product or service, right? Because then it inherently sells itself versus you
Yeah.
having to go out there and acquire business. Um, and and especially so in a management company where so many of your customers are bringing you repeat business in the form of we're buying new buildings and we're bringing it to you. And if you're doing a very good job managing their real estate, then they're incentivized to go out there and continue investing. They feel the confidence to continue going out there and buying more assets. And conversely, if you're on the ownership side, which obviously, that's the side I primarily play in and work with a lot of different management companies in different markets, it's hard to really commit to a new marketplace or really dive in on deals, like underwrite aggressively, feel confident in taking them down if you're not as confident with whoever's going to be managing them. It's hard to quantify that, but it's most certainly a feeling that I think a lot of investors face, where it's like, I'm not the biggest fan of my management company. I don't necessarily have an alternative, so I'm probably not going to be as aggressive in pursuing deals here.
Hmm.
So it's like both in winning new business and also expanding business with your current client base. Now, before we get to 250 to 500, because that'll be the next kind of stage, 50 to 250, what were some of the key hires there? And it's weird because you were half property manager, half business owner, however you kind of divvied up, 90% at that time property manager, 10% business owner. But like, what were the first couple of really key hires there? And I think this will be helpful for other folks who are maybe in a similar position, whether management in-house, trying to start a management company, as it relates to planning out who they should hire and when.
Yeah. One of the one of the first key hires that we made was an administrative assistant. The biggest thing that consumed my time initially was dealing with low dollar per hour tasks. Low dollar per hour tasks are just, unskilled, annoying thing, like responding to emails, answering the phone, right? Tenants call and they want to, talk about their woes and, get someone to listen to them. And, that's just a part of the business, right? And I want someone to be there to listen to them, but that is certainly not the best use of my time as, the only guy working at the company. So what we did, between 50 to 250 was find a company that placed industry specific VAs. And I might use two types of lingo here. So VA is a virtual assistant, right? That's someone that works outside of the United States and they work remotely. They're also called remote team members. That's maybe sort of the more PC way. And I kind of like that a little bit more because I think VA has kind of a connotation about it. I don't know what it is exactly, but so I call them RTMs, remote team members. And we hired an RTM, and her name, was Belen, and she took all those tasks off my plate. And that was a game changer. I mean, that freed up, I went from having, 9 hours of work per day, and call it 6 hours of that was low dollar per hour tasks. And that just went all to her and freed up 6 hours of my day to hire and more valuable dollar per hour tasks. And really that concept right there, delegating tasks to other team members so that I can focus on higher dollar per hour tasks, has been the model for scaling the whole business. So we hired her initially. Then what was taking up a lot of my time was the was coordinating contractors to handle work orders. So then we hired our first maintenance technician, and that made it so that I didn't have to call, 5 different contractors 5 times a day to get them to address these work orders. Then the next thing that was taking up most of my time was leasing and specific property management, going to property inspections, showing units, processing rental applications. So the next hire we made was a property manager. And once we had those 3 hires in place, an administrative assistant, a property manager, and a maintenance technician, the business that started really running itself. And that was where I sort of got my first taste of independence from the business, where it was like, okay, I can have a sick day, and it's not like it's not like Blue Door shuts down. We had the sort of the key players in place with an administrative assistant, a maintenance tech, and a property manager. And one of the things that I remember you taught me was you don't have to reinvent the wheel when starting a business, right? So when you're starting a business or doing anything business related, go out and ask yourself, what are the pros doing, and just simply copy them. Like you don't
Yeah.
need to reinvent property management. Guys who are running 1,000 unit property management companies, 5,000 unit property management companies, 10,000 unit property management companies, how are they doing it? What people are they hiring? What software are they using? And that's exactly what I did, and that sort of turbocharged our growth. And it's interesting because I sort of had to overcome, I don't know, like a personal mental hurdle with doing that. It felt like maybe, I don't know, like copying, or, maybe disingenuous or something like that. But it's not, nobody owns ideas,
Yeah.
and if they're talking publicly about what their business does, then that's fair game for anyone to try to emulate. So that made a huge difference, not trying to like, figure every part of the business out for myself, but tapping into other people's experiences and success and failures. And we did that sort of organically, but then we also hired some consultants too, like Peter Lohman. He runs a great property management company out in Ohio. We hired him as a coach for some periods of time, and he set us up with some systems, set us up with Notion. So that made a huge difference when going from 50 to 250 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just real quick, as a quick follow up, because we're are on the topic right now, delegation. Any books, resources, podcasts, whatever? Like, how did you? Delegation's a muscle that must be developed over a long period of time, and it's probably the number one thing that most new business owners have, challenges with, especially if you're coming into the business not from a field where you have been delegating in a professional setting. Certainly the hardest thing for me to get my arms around as a business owner. How did you get, obviously doing it helps to develop that, but any other resources you'd recommend for listeners?
Yeah. So when I think about my experience delegating, there was really 2 challenges. The first was fear. The second was ego. So the first being fear, I was scared that other people would mess something up when I delegated to them. The second fear was ego. I thought that if I delegated to them, they wouldn't do it as well as I would, or it would somehow make me maybe less important in some way. And both of those things were really holding me back, and I just had to overcome those. And really the way I overcame it was by just just forcing myself to delegate, honestly.
Yeah.
And I started with unimportant tasks, so if they did mess it up, it didn't hugely impact the business. And that was a great way to like get comfortable with it initially, and then start to delegate more and more and more. I don't have any specific resources that would help, but it's just a fear that you have to overcome. And if you're going to scale a business, and if you're going to grow a business, you're going to have to learn how to delegate. So you better start doing it sooner rather than later. And
Yeah.
and on the other side of delegation, right, is so much freedom and opportunity. Like when you have other people doing the things that you were doing, you can do higher dollar per hour tasks. So you just really got to overcome fear and ego and realize that, your time is better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, for sure. And the easy way to do it, right, is to hire a VA or an RTM, right? And you're not taking a massive financial risk by just that's like doing it on easy mode, right?
Yeah.
Or I don't even know if that's the right analogy, but doing so in such a way to where if you're not making such a big gamble or bet on it, and that way you can at least develop the fundamentals. All right,
Yeah,
so
and just to comment on that too, that is a huge part of Blue Dot Living strategies, leveraging remote team members specifically because you can hire them for such competitive wages compared to what you can get for an American employee. And there
mhm,
are, for people who are listening, that maybe there are some in the property management industry, but if you're in another industry too, there are plenty of websites that offer industry specific RTMs. If you just type in whatever industry you're in, like a doctor VA or gym owner VA, you'll find a ton of websites that hire and train VAs specifically for the industry that you're in. So you can have a remote team member placed in your business that understands how your business works, and they can be productive from day one.
100%. Yeah, frankly, if you're running a business and you're not leveraging global talent in 2024, you're being left behind. We're at the point now where that business is becoming really mature, or well, both that business as it relates to the talent agencies that place RTMs, and then the acceptance of them in a US based workforce is also becoming pretty standardized and pretty mature. If you're not doing it anymore, you're truly being left behind.
100%. Yep.
So to recap, 50 to 250, admin assistant, maintenance tech, PM. We're getting comfortable with delegation. We're getting comfortable with being a business owner. All of everything associated with making the business a little less fragile. Now we're going 250 to 500, right? We have at 250, we got some people on payroll. We're starting to develop a bit of a team. Now we're starting to, this is becoming a real business from like a revenue standpoint. What were some of the big takeaways going from 250 to 500, or some of those big kind of events along that growth trajectory that you want to highlight?
Yeah. It sort of followed more of the same story. And I don't know if I would recommend the strategy that we took here specifically, but I'll just lay it to you honestly and vulnerably. So, the path to growth, right? I would get to the point where I'm working and doing a ton of stuff, and then I go, man, I should really hire someone, and then I hire someone and rip half of my responsibilities and say, here you go, and then that's that person's job. And then we get some more units and I'm doing other tasks, and then eventually I'm working a ton and doing a ton of stuff, and then I just rip half of those responsibilities, hand it to someone else, and keep going. And so the other sequential hires that we had, so after hiring a property manager, maintenance tech, admin assistant, we ended up hiring eventually a maintenance coordinator that coordinated the work orders between the maintenance techs. We hired more maintenance techs. We hired a maintenance manager to manage unit turns, capital expenditures. We ended up hiring an assistant property manager, and we hired a bookkeeper and a tenant relationship manager. And so all of those roles have been born out of sort of me feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah,
Like
which is
we
normal,
hired
I
some.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is normal. We hire someone, the business keeps running. I realize, I'm working very hard, and then hire someone else and give them additional responsibilities. So a lot of the positions were just sort of made organically by the needs of the business, and the needs of any business will stand out to you because usually something's going wrong, like work orders getting missed or something like that. Okay, we need someone to help coordinate that because I can't do it. Leasing's taking a little bit long, we need someone processing rental applications. Okay, hire a leasing agent. So a lot of it just followed sort of organic trajectory, and a lot of it was like, okay, I'm working too much, I need to hire someone.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so maybe I'll phrase this in a slightly different way. So if we look backwards, we're now at the 500 unit mark in terms of kind of our discussion here, right? Which is basically where we're at now. We're at 550 multis, 100 and change on the HOA side, 700 units total. But we're not far past kind of what we're talking about here. If you were to look backwards, whether it's at 100 units or 50 units or 500 units or wherever, is there something that you would have done differently as it relates to making this higher, then making this decision at this point, focusing on something else at a different point in time, like just having the experience of getting to this point? Is there something that you would have done differently if you kind of knew this ahead of time?
Yeah, maybe a few things come to mind. I would have leveraged global talent faster and wider,
Mm.
because it's amazing what RTMs can do. Um, at this point, I'm sort of the belief that probably most of my business could be run by RTMs. Um, if you consider how much of my day-to-day work am I doing at a computer versus out in the field, the answer is I'm doing all of my day-to-day work at a computer. So if I can do it at a computer in New Hampshire, then someone else can do it at a computer in Argentina or at a computer in El Salvador or anywhere else in the world. Um, and so, I feel like I had to overcome that belief, but maybe I'm still in the process of overcoming the belief that, the tasks that an RTM can do are limited or, short in scope. Um, I would have expanded and used them a lot more, a lot faster. And I think that would have made the business run a little bit smoother. What else would I have done? I would have leveraged relationships with other property managers more. So something that I
Mm.
do frequently now is ask bigger players to get coffee. So I'll reach out to guys in our markets that run 1,000, 2,000 unit property management businesses, and I'll say, let's get coffee. What are you doing? I want to get to know you. I'm growing a business, you're growing a business. Maybe we can work together. Let's talk. And I wasn't really doing that when I started. Maybe the reason was insecurity. I thought, well, these guys are running big businesses. What do they want to do with, a guy like me? I'm just managing 50 units. I'm, sort of a nobody, right? But that was, I think, a wrong way to look at it. I would have reached out to those people a lot more. I would have let them know, hey, I'm serious. I'm here to build a business. You should know me because maybe we can work together at some point. Maybe I could refer clients to you. I would have tried to think of maybe of some ways to bring value to those guys. Um, and those relationships with the bigger players can be really valuable because they can give you tips on how to grow your business. And also, there are other opportunities, like maybe we could sell our business to them, or maybe we could buy their business, or maybe they have an employee that they just can't fit into their organization, so they refer them to us, or they have a client they don't really like, they can refer them to us. We've had that happen with Blue Door. So I would have made way more industry connections, and I would have leveraged RTMs a lot more.
Yeah, those are great tips and tips that are applicable regardless of the business you're in. Whether you're trying to build
Absolutely.
a portfolio, whether you're trying to build a flooring business or a property management company or any business, all that those are applicable regardless. All right, so last one before we get into some tactical kind of management stuff, which obviously we want to do. Going from where we're at now, 550, multi units, and then a little over 700, including the HOA. Obviously, we have goals of expanding a little bit more throughout the state. I don't think we're breaking news here. It's like we want to open an office out in the Seacoast at some point. We have the goals and the aspirations of building a management company that manages 1,000, 1,500, couple thousand units, at least in New Hampshire. What do you see as some of the challenges that you will be encountering? Throughout the next, call it, stage of growth from where we're at to 1,000 units, right? I'll just kind of vaguely try to bind it with that unit range.
Yeah, good question. Probably more of the same. you know, who
Finding
do
more
we hire?
more
What do
people
we
that are
do?
good at what they do, and yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, pretty much. Now we're reaching a point in the business scale, right, where we can start to hire um, sort of some, I don't know if I would call them, C-level executives, right? But we could hire like an operations manager. I think that'll probably maybe be one of our next few hires, right? So someone who is overseeing the running of the business, and then eventually hiring, managers that manage managers. Um, and that'll be, sort of a next step. I'm sure I'll have a lot to overcome mentally with that too, right? Handing off more and
Yep.
more control of the business. Some of the challenges that I see are, feeling like uh if we open an office in Dover, right, making sure that that office has enough oversight to be run well. I'm concerned about the quality of our product decreasing as our offices spread out. I'm sure we'll find some, way around that, but that's a challenge that I see coming up. um, Making sure that our company culture remains intact, right? I think that's one thing that we've done really well at Blue Door. We have a really excellent employee culture. All of our employees really like working here. I think they have a lot of fun working here. And maintaining that, well, pushing for growth is a challenge. And one of the questions that I ask myself really often is why? And it's a question that I'm still answering as time goes on. Why do I want to build a business? Why do I want to build a bigger business? Why should we grow? And there's a few different answers to that, right? There's personal human motivation, right? I'd like to make more money to provide a better lifestyle for my family. There's also greater aspirational motivations as well. I like giving people jobs. I like giving people raises. I like promoting people. I like developing people in our business, giving them the opportunity to develop additional skills, increase their own personal income, provide a better lifestyle for their own families. And I like doing things well. It's really fulfilling to me to run a property management business that manages property well and provides real estate investors with profitable investments due to our execution. That is a gratifying thing to me. And so I hope it is for our team too. And I try to communicate that to them. Like when we buy, or when you buy a crappy building and place it under management with us, right? And over the course of a year, we stabilize it, right? And you invest all this money into it, and we manage that investment, and then we rent it out to really nice people, and then that building's really performing. I try to point that out to our team and say, hey, look, we took this building in this town, and it's now a nice building. And
Mhm.
it's a great investment for Axel, and it's a great home for these 5 people that now live there. And that's I like that, and I try to let our team see that too. So I think that those are some of the challenges, right? More of the same. Who do we hire? How do we structure it? How do we make sure that the product quality stays high? And
Yeah.
yeah, that's more of the same.
It's incredibly well said. No, I mean you outlined it extremely well, right? And I think it's kind of an inflection point with any business where you go from delegating tasks and work that you oversee to delegating decisions and ownership.
Yeah.
That's a because then you need to coach and manage and train on the thought process behind making decisions versus executing something in a Loom video, right? I mean, I'm kind of speaking plainly here, but
No,
that's a
no,
that's a,
that's
that's a totally different
exactly.
ball game.
Yeah. It's
And
way
it's
different to say like, here, push this button versus here's how to design a button that should be pushed.
exactly. But again, yeah, you're right. I mean, it is more of the same. I mean, that's the fundamental process of growing really any business, right? It's you need to continue balancing great service with the desire for growth, and then keeping all the people involved, invested, motivated, and I mean to back up a step to get the right people even in the business to begin with. All right, so let's talk about actual tactical property management. For the folks out there who are listening that are like, this is all well and good, and I relate to a lot of this. I want to know how to run my properties better. Let's talk about some of the pillars of successful property management. If you were to kind of define the important processes or components of the management process, right? You're in the office, you're coaching the team, and you're like, we got to get these things right. If we get these things right, we're probably doing a great job for our clients and a great job from a management standpoint. What comes to mind? And I'm asking you an open question here because I kind of want you to take it wherever you take it. But successful property management, what comes to mind?
Yeah. Number one and number two and number three is tenant selection. Number one, two, and three. A lot of people think the real estate is the asset, but in my opinion, the tenant is the asset. You know,
Mm.
if you select poor tenants that don't pay rent, you know how much your building is worth?
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, it's the value of your building can be hugely impacted by poor tenant selection. So if you don't have tenant selection ironed out in your business, that's like number one to start with. So just to tell you briefly what we do at Blue Door, right? Income verification. They have to show us a document that proves their income. They have to make at least 3 times the monthly rent. They have to have a minimum 600 credit score. They have to have no evictions or foreclosures in the last 4 years. We do a credit and background check. It's amazing. Our background check will sometimes miss things that a simple Google or Facebook search will find. So just, a 1 minute search saves us from renting to a ton of, tenants that do, illegal activities or undesirable stuff. Um, uh, Also, we require everyone in the apartment who's living over the age of 18 to fill out an application. And then we call landlord references as well. That's huge, what we've uncovered by calling previous landlords. So that right there, if you pick good tenants, you will have so many additional problems solved. You'll have to do way less evictions, so you don't have to get good at evictions. Um, nice tenants are often more they're easier to work with maintenance issues, right? They'll report maintenance more proactively. They'll work with you when you need to get access to their apartment to make the repairs. They are typically less damaging to the unit when they occupy it. when you really screen someone and get a good tenant. So, there's just so much that flows from tenant selection. I would just, if you don't have that ironed out, that's your number one piece of homework from the show is like figure out how to improve your tenant selection process. Um, Aside from that, the other things I'm sure you could guess, right? Be a good landlord. When a tenant files a work order, let them know that it's been scheduled and schedule it promptly. Get the work done, and then we use property management software. There's a ton of different type of softwares available, but we use Appfolio. It's a good property manager, like enterprise level software. There are some. If you're like a small mom and pop landlord, there's some other ones. I think maybe Rentvine or Stessa. Or Tenant Cloud. I think those are some free sort of mom and pop softwares that you can use. But with those softwares, right, the tenants have a portal where they can pay. They can also file maintenance requests. They can communicate with us. So be a good landlord, right? If they file a maintenance request, get it fixed. If they have an issue, get back to them promptly. Renew leases when they come up for renewal. Do proactive maintenance on the properties that you manage, right? So if you see that the porch is getting a little rotten, don't wait for the tenant to fall through when they're going in their front door, right? Proactively take care of this stuff. And I feel like if you have good tenant selection and if you're a good landlord based on those criteria that I just described there, your asset's going to perform. It's going to perform above market.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'd say that's sort of what it takes to be a good property manager.
Yeah, no, those are all really important and obviously good to discuss. Yeah, tenant selection is interesting, especially obviously we have people listening to this podcast that are located everywhere throughout the country, but we have a lot of people in the Northeast. We have a lot of people in Boston because that's where I live, and just by virtue of my network, and it becomes even more critical when you're operating in a city or a marketplace that is not as management company or landlord friendly, right? You can
Mhm.
maybe be a little bit more lax with your tenant screening if you're in Arkansas versus if you're in Massachusetts or New York or California. But one thing is true throughout the country. I shouldn't say throughout the country because maybe there's some states where this isn't changing, but it's certainly the case in New Hampshire. It is the case in a lot of states throughout the country where the process of working through an eviction is becoming more and more cumbersome, more and more challenging. It's taking longer and longer. And, I'm not going to get into politics here, but like, unfortunately, housing is a politicized component of the local business landscape. And it is something that over time is becoming a little bit more tenant friendly. So tenant screening becomes more and more and more important as we just spend more time in this business and as we continue operating into the future than it has been in the past. So that's something that it's important to highlight. Um,
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure you're always following fair housing laws,
yeah.
whatever those are in the state that you're in. So an example of maybe the difference between a state like Massachusetts and New Hampshire, from what I understand, I'm not an attorney, but in Massachusetts you can't discriminate against someone based on their source of income, whereas in New Hampshire you can. Now, why would you? I don't know. You have to decide for yourself what circumstances you would want to discriminate on. But that's one example of a challenge that is different in a state than a state that's different than New Hampshire.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned a bunch of other stuff, right? You want to maintenance quickly, work through the renewal process efficiently, just be in general an attentive, operator of the property. I want to talk about leasing real quick because, in my opinion, it's like if you're reducing vacancy and you're leasing at the right price, you're basically taking care of 90% of successfully managing your property, and we'll include quality tenant selection in that, the part of the, within the leasing process. Because the reality is, right, and if we're going to talk about the finances of it all, the majority of your expenses are fixed in operating real estate. Your property taxes are fixed, your insurance is fixed. You're probably similar utilities, and if you have more vacancy, utilities probably go up because you own those utilities, right? So whether you're 70% occupied or 100% occupied, or you're renting at 70% of market rents or 100% of market rents, your expenses are basically going to be the same, which means that it's really important to get the leasing part of the process figured out. So with all of that said, when you think about the leasing process, what are some things that come to mind as it relates to building out a successful leasing process in terms of leasing units, in terms of reducing vacancy, getting the most in rent, et cetera?
Yeah. So I number one would be have a process, Identify what are the steps that you follow to rent out your apartments. A lot of landlords, especially mom and pop landlords, I think just kind of wing it. Like, I guess I'll just post it on Craigslist and see who calls me. You should have all of the steps identified. So number one, how am I going to market the process? Rather, how am I going to market the apartment? Where am I going to post it? How are people going to contact me? If they're interested, how do they schedule a viewing? If they'd like to apply, how do they apply? You should get all those questions answered before you start even marketing the property or before you have a vacancy, in my opinion. So we have all those identified in Blue Door, and that makes the leasing process a process, and it makes it a clear and fast process. So this is an area where I think you can leverage software really effectively. So we use a software called Tenant Turner. With Tenant Turner, it allows us to click one button and it posts the apartment on 20 different websites. So it posts it on Zillow, Trulia, Hotpads, apartments.com. It contains all the information that would be relevant to a prospect making a decision. What's the rent? What's the security deposit? Does it have parking? What are the utilities, et cetera, et cetera. So it answers a lot of the questions that people would be calling us to ask if we just said, one bedroom apartment for rent and no other additional context. And then Tenant Turner also allows prospects to self-schedule showings of the apartment. And then it has two different options for those showings. They can be in-person showings where a staff member, a Blue Door, will show up and show them the apartment. But we've also really leveraged self-showings where we have electronic locks on our properties. And through Tenant Turner, someone can fill out a pre-qualifying questionnaire, give us a picture of their ID. And if they qualify for the apartment and provide a picture of their ID, they can actually show themselves the apartment. And that's been huge for saving our employees a ton of time. That's an example of a task that you really need an American employee to do, right? You can't have an RTM showing units in person, unless maybe you get like one of those FedEx robots, right, that delivers packages. But I don't think we're there yet in the property management industry. So, have a process, have those steps clearly identified, and then consider using software to make your process much more streamlined.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think you probably have a bunch of people listening to this, or we probably have a bunch of people listening to this conversation who are like, I'm going to let somebody just into my place without supervision. Like that is a really scary, scary thought.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of want you to squash this limiting belief. Maybe like we manage a lot of C-class units, right? A lot of C-class real estate, workforce housing, kind of median income type folks. We're not just managing like A-class newly developed product where you kind of have a sense of who's coming in and out of the door. Like, have we had any problems? Do we, speak to that? Because I know it was a concern of both of ours when we started doing it.
Yeah. There was a huge thing that I had to overcome as a lemming. I had all the concerns that you would probably expect, right? What if they squat? What if they smash all the windows? What if they leave the faucet running and clog the sink? And so we've been doing self showings for 3 years now, and and during those 3 years, we've probably done, I don't know, 8,000 showings, something like that, an incredible amount. We usually have 20 showings a day, so someone can do the math. We've had a toilet clogged once, and that's been the extent of damage done to the property. So, I like you said, we're managing C-class rental property. It's not A-class, high-rise, nice, new modern property. A lot of the buildings we manage were built between 1890 and 1920, and we haven't had that issue. I think a big deterrent is that people have to upload a picture of their ID, and Tenant Turner uses AI to verify that it is in fact a valid ID, and the name matches the information that they gave us. That right there is a big deterrent. And then that's also some insurance for me, right? If someone shows up and damages the property, I can easily check the record of everyone who's been there prior to the damage being done, and we could file a report if needed. But yeah, the amount of time that we've saved and the amount of money we've saved by not having to pay a leasing agent to show those units has just been, a game changer for our business. 8,000 showings times 30 minutes each. We've saved 4,000 hours of employee pay time. So, yeah, I highly recommend that people consider self showings, and you just try it, and you'll see that your property won't be damaged so long as you do it, in a prudent way. Right. I
Yep.
wouldn't just text people the code off of Craigslist. Right. But if you do it in a prudent way, I don't think you'll have a lot of the issues that you're concerned about.
So I'm going to challenge both of our, the Blue Door Living business process, which is kind of funny, right? Um, what I'm saying is, what I could say as a prospective adopter of this process is like, well, there is a benefit to having a leasing agent there selling the property, selling the neighborhood, selling the unit, talking about some of the nuances, all of that stuff. And obviously we do give the option for folks to have somebody present there to kind of work through it, right? And there is
Mhm.
inherently a trade-off between you have a leasing agent there selling a property, but that means you can probably process fewer showings or work through fewer showings than if you self-show. How do you think about that balance? How do you think about, just the upside in having somebody from Blue Door Living there or the property management company there selling the building? And is there anything that's kind of done outside of that in person that taps into kind of like the sales process behind trying to sell the unit to a prospective tenant?
We do quite a bit of uh, marketing in the listing description itself. So when we post an apartment for rent, we'll often include some information about the neighborhood where the apartment's located, its proximity to stores and the highway. So we do some selling in the actual listing itself. I have some experience in this personally because I was the leasing agent at that previous property management company that I worked at. And in my opinion, um, I don't know how effectively someone can sell an apartment when they're there as the leasing agent. The amenities are there for the people to see. The parking is there for the people to see. The neighborhood is there for the people to see. So, I can go in there with a happy attitude and a friendly face and tell them all the interesting things. But really, in my experience when I was doing that as the leasing agent, I was just reading the listing description to them. I was just giving them information, and I, it's I don't know how much actual selling there is to do. They're going to see the apartment, they're going to see the neighborhood, they're going to see the building, and they're going to make a decision. And what additional information I can provide to them that they can't just see with their eyes. I don't know how much information there is to give. And so, maybe you do in-person showings if you're, Joe Schmo and you own a duplex. But if you want to build a business that scales, if you own 100 units and you're trying to self-manage or you're running a management company, doing in-person showings is going to take a lot of time. So run the numbers for yourself and say, okay, let's say if we do an in-person showing and we close leads 30% faster, does that make up for all the time we save by not having a person there? I think if you run that calculation, you'll find that no, it still saves you way more money to just do, self-access showings.
Yeah. And the right answer is probably a combo of both, right? Because I think that there is some value in having someone there going, hey, they're, down the street, they're putting a new Starbucks, I don't know, whatever, right? You have some knowledge and you can sell. It's just a 5-minute walk to the school, whatever. Or if there's a unique situation with the unit where it's like there's not washer dryer hookups in here yet, but we are going to be installing them and they will be in there by the time you move in. So there is some balance, but I agree with you, right? You want to strike that balance because of the fact that there is value in just doing a higher volume of showings in a shorter period of time and just getting more bodies through the door,
Mm.
which is obviously an upside as well.
One other thing I meant to mention too, right? When we did in-person showings, we did Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. because that's when our leasing agent was working. With self-person showings, we do 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. every single day of the week. So we have had a ton of additional showings by offering those weekend hours where people can see units.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. Um, cool. So we talked about leasing, we talked about some of the other things, tenant selection, obviously that's critical. Um, I think of, kind of a closing topic here, and then we can wrap up the show. But property management is an interesting business in that you sit between two groups of individuals that are pulling you in different directions, right? That have competing interests. Obviously, the property owner wants to maximize rents, maximize profitability, spend the appropriate amount on maintenance, not over improve, not waste money on the expense side, etc. And then on the resident side, they obviously want to pay less in rents. They want, things fixed in maybe a different way. Or, there's competing interests here, and the challenge with property management oftentimes is sitting in the middle and trying to balance those two. Um, I guess in terms of asking a question here that makes sense, What do you find is one of the bigger disconnects, or misconceptions, or something that you need to explain to like management clients as they engage you and Blue Door as a third party management clients? Like, what do you find is a common kind of talking point disconnect with owners that you're constantly trying to either educate or set expectations, et cetera, with them as it relates to what your role is and what you're doing as a property manager?
It's an interesting challenge. It is sort of being on two ends of a seesaw, or two ends of a rope and tug of war sometimes, trying to balance the tenant's needs with the directives that were given from our owner client. And in property management, it's interesting because all of the property owners that hire us become clients of our business, and so we have a fiduciary duty to those clients to do what's in their best interest. So at the end of the day, we're taking the landlord's side because the landlord is the one that hired us. And we explain this to all of our tenants. When new tenants move in, we show them a brokerage relationship disclosure form. We explain the landlord is our client. We're always taking the landlord's side. You are our customer. We'll be honest. We'll treat you fairly, and we will treat you honestly. But if there's a dispute between you and the landlord, we're on the landlord's side. And so it can be challenging sometimes because we have unreasonable tenants. Sometimes we also have unreasonable clients. Oftentimes maybe some of the challenges that our clients have are around repairs and maintenance, right? Building upkeep is an annoying, sometimes unpredictable expense, but it's vital to keep the tenants happy. And it's vital to make prompt repairs to the property. And so we always try to save our clients money by collecting multiple quotes when it's not an emergency. And we have a great group of contractors that we use, and because we bring them a volume of business, they often give us a pretty good discount. But I would say that is maybe one of the most common challenges. Is tenants are like, hey, can I get this thing fixed on my apartment? And we're like, oh, it's really expensive, and we have to talk the client through making this repair. And I would just encourage people who are considering being in this business to approach it from a human-based perspective. Imagine if you were a tenant and you were being asked to pay the rents that you're asked to pay, and something breaks and it has to be fixed. Just I think empathy goes a long way. And so we try to communicate that both ways. We'll talk to tenants and we'll say, hey, imagine that you were the landlord in this situation. This is why it's challenging for us to do XYZ. And then same thing with our clients. We'll say, hey, we understand where the tenant's coming from here. We really recommend that you do XYZ. Ultimately, the tenants are our clients, or rather the landlords are our clients, the tenants are our customers. So we always take the landlord side. But it's something that's unique to property management, kind of being the middleman.
Yeah, it inherently makes well, it can make it a challenging business because as an owner who's worked with multiple PMs, right, I obviously feel that tension and understand that and as a PM, as someone who works with a PM company, I think it's important for everybody listening to understand that, yes, it is important at times to get multiple quotes for something when you feel like a price might be too high. And in doing that, usually the second or third quote is less than the first one, right? And it does make sense to do that. But it also makes sense to balance that desire with the desire to keep folks happy, increase your renewal rate, right? Like quickly attending to maintenance is a leading indicator that somebody's going to renew. That's a great way to build goodwill. And no,
Hmm.
you probably shouldn't get multiple different quotes if the hot water's out and it's going to take you 10 days to do it, because then they don't have a hot shower for 10 days. Well, they're most definitely not going to stay in that apartment, most likely, right? Or it's
Yep.
less likely that they will. So you kind of have to balance that as a PM client with your PM as it relates to how you actually manage that process and how diligent you are about trying to drive down the expense side of the P&L, because oftentimes it's going to be at the expense of keeping your revenue high and minimizing your vacancy and all the stuff that really drops, the dollars to the bottom line. So yeah, it's interesting, especially in a market like ours where everything is built in the early 1900s and there's more maintenance than than other parts of the country where most of the real estate was built in the last 40, 50 years. But nevertheless, I think that's helpful for people to understand. All right, well, we're coming up on our time here, and I want to make sure that I get you out of here on time. But if folks want to learn more about Blue Door, maybe they want to connect with you personally, maybe share your contact info and how they can learn more about the business, but also share anything that you might personally be looking for on the investment side. I know you're in the market to potentially take something down here in the short term. So, I encourage you to share that as well in case we got someone listening who can assist with that.
For sure, yeah. If you want to reach out to me after hearing the show, I'd love to hear from you. I live in Manchester. Our Blue Door is out of Manchester, New Hampshire, and I'm always down to talk real estate or property management. So if I can help you, reach out to me. You can email me at Ryan RYAN period Weiss WEISS at bluedoorliving.org. Feel free to just go to bluedoorliving.org. You can call our office, ask for Ryan, or we have like some info, some contact sheets there you can fill out. So that's bluedoorliving.org. Personally, I'm interested in doing another house hack. I have a wife and a baby, and we actually just found out this morning that we're having another baby. So
Oh, hell yeah.
yeah, so it's
No way.
yeah,
Congrats,
yeah.
man.
Thanks, man. So I think we got one more house hack in us before she's like, okay, I need to not have people living in the walls next to us.
Yeah.
So we're trying to find a triplex or fourplex in the surrounding Manchester area, and we have owner occupied debt, so we can pay top dollar. So if anyone's listening and they know of anyone who wants to sell a triplex or fourplex in Manchester, the surrounding area, yeah, reach out to me. If I could
Absolutely.
if I could share one more thought, Axel,
Hmm.
one of the things that I've learned in my short career here, I feel like you and I have been able to accomplish a lot together. Um, One of the things that I've learned is that success is very simple, but it's not, that doesn't mean that it's easy. And to me, success is simply doing a few vital actions every day. And so, one of the habits that I've instilled is identifying each morning what are three things that I'm going to do today to make progress on my top priorities. And so, if there's anything that I would recommend to people, it's try to instill that habit in yourself. What are the three things that I can do today to move the needle? And then at the end of the day, you can just simply ask yourself, did I or did I not do those three things? And then it's not a surprise whether you make progress or not. Two other books I would recommend: The Compound Effect and Atomic Habits. Two great books. I think I've sent you a copy of maybe one or both.
Yeah, I've read them both, and
Great.
they're killer books. And we could dive into that whole topic too, and maybe in a few months we'll have you back here and we can dive into some of the things you're doing on a daily basis that, when stacked on each other over a long period of time, produce some of the results we're talking about. But I talk about it all the time on the podcast, especially as it relates to what I talk about a lot in general, just because it's what we do in our business, which is like finding deals and raising money, and it's a lot more marketing kind of sales talk, which is all just fundamentally just doing the same shit every single day over an extremely long period of time, making the calls, sending the mail, making the offers, sending the email blasts over and over and over and over and over. But it's applicable in all aspects of life and business. So it's one
it's
of those
it's
topics that you could really spend a lot of time on.
yeah, it's boring, right? Success is boring,
Yeah,
But
exactly.
you do some boring crap for 5 years, but then you have a great portfolio.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think the longer I'm in business, one of my favorite quotes, I don't know who said it, I saw it on maybe like Twitter or something like that, but it's like, the reason people are advanced is not because they're doing different things or advanced things, but it's because they never don't do the fundamentals. And I think that that's so true, where it's like there's no strategy that is being gate kept by the truly elite. It's like, no, they're just doing the stuff that you're doing, but they are doing it a little bit better, a little bit more often, and for a longer period of time. And so they're just never not doing the fundamentals. And I always
Exactly.
come back
Yeah.
to sports analogies, and it's like, A-Rod, I don't know, A-Rod's polarizing because this is from Boston, and everybody, or live in Boston, everybody here hates A-Rod, but he was a great baseball player, and he would just hit off a tee for an hour a day. And it's like, that's the building block for success, is doing the fundamentals, just doing them in an advanced way and getting really, really good at them and doing them for a long period of time. So I think
Mhm.
that's a great closing message. And to really round out the show here, if you're in New Hampshire, and you're an active real estate investor, reach out to Ryan just on a personal level outside of anything management related. I'm sure you guys will have something to talk about.
Let's get
Um,
coffee.
exactly. And if you are a New Hampshire owner that's potentially interested in working with us on the management side, again, reach out to Ryan. He could probably help you and tell you a little bit more about Blue Door, which, we obviously talked about some things that we do, but we didn't really like dive into the business. I think we kind of talked a little bit more generally around growing a business and property management, which is great. But obviously we can dive into how we might be able to work together as well. But thanks again, man. This has been great. It's been a pleasure watching you grow the business, watching you just grow as a person too along the way. And excited to have you back and to do this again sometime soon.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, man, and thanks for being my business partner.